Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for Saturday, May 11th, 2019, the 10th year of Changi, the 4th month and the 7th day by the heavenly calendar. Tim Elder sitting in for the second King of Changi, Hyungjin Moon this morning. Let's go right to our weather. It's 51 degrees right now at the Cheonrygung Palace, and we're looking towards maybe a low of 47 before the sun rises, or it may not quite get that far down. But it's partly to mostly cloudy now, and then it'll be a lot of sunshine during the day, sunshine mixing with clouds, getting up to 66, which is fairly more normal for this time of year. Now, tomorrow, Monday and Tuesday, it's going to be quite cool. Tomorrow, the high temperature, the daytime high, is going to drop to 47 degrees, just 47 degrees. That's about 20 degrees below the normal temperature for this time of year. And there will be on and off rain and drizzle during the day tomorrow. And then Monday as well, 48 degrees for a daytime high and periods of rain and cold. And then on Tuesday, getting up to just 51 degrees during the day, cloudy, a few showers, and cool. So we're going to have a few days of cooler temperatures now. And let's see, today the real feel will actually be 72 degrees, it says. So even though the high be 66, it'll feel like it's 72 during the day. And winds will be out of the northwest at 7 miles an hour, gusting to 10 miles, and a 5% chance of thunderstorms. And tonight, northeast winds, no winds change to the northeast, at 5 miles an hour, gusting to 7 miles, and a 20% chance of thunderstorms tonight. Let's see, the sun is rising at 5:44 this morning and setting at 8:07 this evening for 14 hours and 23 minutes of daylight today. All right, so let's go now to our Rima. I'm in Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 12. This is where Peter is delivered from prison. Now, this is the kind of thing that the Spirit was doing, Holy Spirit was doing then. And after I read this, I'll talk about some of the things that I heard from our older members about what happened, things that happened in the early days of Father's ministry. But yes, the Holy Spirit is capable of a lot of amazing things, and we'll see one of those examples here. Here in beginning of verse 1 in chapter 12 of Acts, now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. So Herod was persecuting some Christians then, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made and without ceasing of the church unto God for him. So Peter's in prison now, and he looks like he's going to be killed after Easter. And so the Christians are praying for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and the light shined in the prison, and he smote Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, and bind on thy sandals, and go. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garment about thee, and follow me. And he went out and followed him, and wist not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord. And they went out and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. And when Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door at the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. Then said they, It is his angel. But Peter continued knocking. And when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But he, beckoning unto them with the hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, God showed these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. Now as soon as it was day, and there was no small stir among the soldiers, what was become of Peter? And when Herod had sought for him and found him not, he examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and there abode. So that's an amazing thing that happened there. So Peter was in prison, sleeping between two soldiers, all right? And he was sleeping between two soldiers, and he was bound with two chains, all right? So he was, connected to the soldiers that were sleeping on either side of him by chains. And also there was a soldier that was guarding the door, and so forth. And then there were also a couple of doors that he had to pass through, past the first and second ward. They came into the iron gate that leadeth into the city. And then there was the iron gate of the prison that you had to get through that you had to open in order to get out of the prison. And the Holy Spirit, or the angel of the Lord, took care of all of that. He smote Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise quickly. All right? And his chains fell off from his hands. That's an amazing thing. So this is the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, as I said, when I was in Korea, I heard many stories from members who joined during the 1950s about some amazing things that happened during the early days of Father's ministry. There was a rumor then that the press had made up all sorts of stuff, and there was one of the sort of the theories that the press promoted was that the Unification Church had some kind of a electromagnetic device or system under the floor, so that when people sat down, they could not get up. And this was actually believed by many people. So that people, and this was how the Unification Church was brainwashing people. And this was widely reported as fact. But also, members did say that, of course, there was no electromagnetic system, and even if there were, I don't know of any electromagnetic system that would keep a person from standing up off of a floor. But also, people actually did say that the practice was that in the morning, before they would go to school or before they would go to a job, they would first go to the church and then go to the job. And some mornings, it was kind of tough to do that, and so they wanted to just, maybe they were a little bit late, they just wanted to go to school without going to the church first. But one lady told me that, she had the experience where she tried to do that and her feet would not move. She could not pick her feet up off the ground in order to go to school. She was trying to skip the step of going to church. But she said her feet were literally glued to the ground. I mean, they just would not move when she was trying to do that. But then when she repented and determined to go to the church first after all, then her feet moved. This kind of thing. Or that one man was, one brother was sitting in the back of the hall when Father was speaking, and suddenly he was transported through the air to the front of the hall. This kind of thing happened. So a lot of the Holy Spirit is capable of a lot of amazing things. So people may ask, well, why don't these things happen now? Why don't these things happen now? Well, I think the human portion of responsibility is a big part of the answer for that. We can't depend on the spirit world to keep us from going places that we shouldn't be going, or even to get us out of prison if we're there. There's a human portion of responsibility. But also, I think in the early days, the spirit world especially, was really desperate, because they were really depending on people in the physical world to accomplish certain things, so that they could, so that the spirit world could also receive the benefit of a returning resurrection. But as Father's foundation grows, and as the foundation of goodness grows, then first of all, there isn't a need for quite that amount of spiritual phenomena, and secondly, we need to be exercising dominion over the spirit world, and not the other way around. By we, I mean people who are in the physical world need to be exercising dominion over the spirit world. And this is one thing that we need to be very careful of. That, of course, spiritual phenomena are very great and wonderful, but fundamentally, we cannot depend on the spirit world to accomplish God's will on earth. That's not the way it works. We who are on earth need to accomplish God's will on earth. That is our portion of responsibility. And so we cannot be depending on miracles to happen. That's not the, shall we say, the mature or healthy way to approach our life of faith. We know what God's will is. We talked about it a few days ago. That God's will, we had a rima from the Chonsongyong, that God's will is to accomplish His purpose of creation. And His purpose of creation is what? Oh, that is accomplished through the establishment of the four-position foundation. That is the God-centered family. The God-centered family. And that needs to be done through our portion of responsibility here on earth. And how we do that? How do we receive the education and training in order to do that? Well, that's the role of the church. The role of the church, the function of the church, is to provide education and training. That's why we come to church on Sunday. Education and training. Of course, education and training take place through other ways as well, other means, but reading God's Word and listening to the King speak about God's Word, and listening to the words that the True Father gives us through the King. This is a very big part of our education and training, and also training ourselves physically as well, to maintain our physical bodies, to make our physical bodies strong, so that we can do these things. That's an important part of our training. But that's also, we're talking about spiritual training. We need to be trained in many ways, not just physical, but also spiritually, also intellectually. Intellectually, we need to be trained. Our minds, our brains are just like any other muscle. They need to be trained how to think, trained how to analyze situations, trained how to analyze dangers and risk, so that we can take the appropriate actions. All kinds of training needs to go on. So yes, this is an amazing spiritual phenomenon, and it's great that Peter was able to get out of prison and to continue his ministry. You see, actually, immediately after this, Herod does some things that cause him to die, and so forth. Yeah. So Herod, yes. But it was also the power of prayer, isn't it? People were praying for him. And because of those prayers, the spirit world was able to act and to bring him out of prison. Praise God for that Rima this morning. Let's go now to the Chonsongyong, where I'm on page 216 in the English E edition. And this is the book on true parents, and chapter 4, which is entitled The Mission of the True Parent, and section 4, the authority and mission of the true parent. Now here again, we get into the controversy over whether we should translate champumo as true parent or true parents, in other words, in the singular or the plural. And in Korean, there is no difference generally there's no difference between the singular and plural. So when we translate it into English, we have to make a decision. And we know from OSTP and also from Father's words in his 615 volumes that champumo is a title that was given to Reverend Moon by God. And so it is a title that was given to him as an individual. So it can be translated into the singular in that sense. And I think here it's when we talk about the authority and mission, we're talking about one true parent. We're talking about Father. And Father's talking about himself here. Champume Kwanang Wasamyang. He's talking about himself. And so anyway, looking at the English translation of the here, it says, so I'm going to change the English translation here into the singular. Why does the true parent come to humanity on earth? He comes to make what people will like the most. That is, make you into true parents. Now there it's plural, okay, because we are talking about men and women becoming true fathers and true mothers, true parents, little true parents, yes. But why does the true parent come to humankind on earth? Well, Father is the true parent that comes, right? He comes from God, and then after coming from God, he restores one woman from the fallen world. And that woman has a fallen lineage, but he restores her to the lineage of God and educates and trains her to the point where she is able to fulfill the original mission of Eve. And this is what Father did. He it took several attempts, but finally was able to accomplish that through the woman who is our true mother, Hyun Shil Kang. So when we talk about the true parent coming to humankind on earth, we're clearly talking about true Father. We're not talking about true Father and Mother, or because she does not come to earth, to humankind on earth. She is on earth, and then she is restored. She is restored by a true Father. So I think here it is clear that we should translate champumo in the singular. So why does the true parent come to humankind on earth? He comes, no, not they come, but he comes to make what people will like the most, that is to make you into true parents, because we're talking about now both men and women becoming true fathers and true mothers, true parents, little true parents. Yes, okay. So this is 1983, words spoken in 1983. Okay. Yeah. When we translate this in the plural, we really are trying to shoehorn something into this, because when they say they come, and that contradicts what we know to be true. So that's one example of how we can make a distinction between the true Father as the true parent and Father and Mother as the true parents. All right? So, yes, praise God for these words that He has given us this morning. Thank you, Father. Okay, let's go right into the news, shall we? So right now, the situation with Iran is growing very worrisome. Interestingly, President Trump is not worried about North Korea. That's probably right. He says, yes, North Korea fired a few missiles, short-range missiles, but that's not a breach of trust, he says. It's not a breach of trust. We're still okay with North Korea, that's what he's saying. But he's focusing on Iran, and he has sent an aircraft carrier there, an air carrier strike group there, not just the carrier. And now the U.S. is warning merchant ships of possible Iranian attacks, and Iranian cleric is threatening the U.S. fleet. So whereas in the Korean Peninsula we seem, at least in the short term, not to be moving towards war, we do seem to be moving towards war in the Middle East, especially in the Persian Gulf. Here, this is a Reuters story published yesterday. Iran could target U.S. commercial ships, including oil tankers, the U.S. Maritime Administration said on Friday. As a senior Iranian cleric said, a U.S. Navy fleet could be destroyed with one missile. In the latest tense exchange between Tehran and Washington, Iran's hardline Revolutionary Guards separately said that Iran would not negotiate with the United States, a stance that seemed partly aimed at discouraging Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his moderate allies from taking up a U.S. offer of talks. U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday urged Iran's leaders talk with him about giving up their nuclear program and said he could not rule out a military confrontation. Not many countries have given up a nuclear program once they had it. I believe South Africa is one example where that did in fact happen. In other words, voluntarily. Libya, I think, did. Yes, I think Libya did. And so now, countries like North Korea and Iran say, well, look what happened to Libya. They got rid of their nuclear program voluntarily or through negotiation with the West, and then they got attacked. Well, yeah, that's true. It's true. So the attack on Libya by, what was it? I think it was maybe Clinton, I think. I can't remember now. Clinton or Bush. Anyway, attacked Libya and brought down Gaddafi, saying that, well, the world is better without him. But now that attack has made it much more difficult to negotiate similar denuclearizations in North Korea and also in Iran. Trump made the offer as he increased economic and military pressure on Iran, moving to cut off all Iranian oil exports this month while beefing up the U.S. Navy and Air Force presence in the Gulf. Acting U.S. Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan approved a new deployment of Patriot missiles to the Middle East, a U.S. official told Reuters on Friday. The U.S. aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, deployed as a warning to Iran, passed through Egypt's Suez Canal on Thursday. So, a lot of times U.S. Aircraft carriers don't like to be seen. They like to sort of travel around the oceans where it's difficult or to be sighted. But passing right through the Suez Canal where the whole world can see you, this is an obvious warning, saying, hey, we're coming for you, Yeah. Suez Canal on Thursday, and American B-52 bombers have also arrived at a U.S. base in Qatar, U.S. Central Command said. So they're doing all this publicly. They're announcing it. They're showing the aircraft carrier going through the Suez Canal. They're making it very public. And it's all, of course, intended for Iran to see that the United States is building up its forces in the Persian Gulf. Iran has dismissed both moves, which the United States said it took after U.S. intelligence signaled possible preparations by Tehran to attack U.S. forces or interests as psychological warfare designed to intimidate it. Well, yeah, it is psychological warfare, but I think they say dismissing it. Well, I don't know if they're really dismissing it. I mean, an aircraft carrier is an aircraft carrier. It's not just psychological. In an advisory posted on Thursday, the U.S. Maritime Administration said that since early May, there have been an increased possibility of Iran or its regional proxies taking action against U.S. and partner interests. These included oil production infrastructure after Tehran threatened to close the vital Strait of Hormuz, checkpoint through which about a fifth of oil consumed globally passes. Yes, there's a little strait there, narrow strait there that carries a lot of oil. A lot of oil passes through that strait. And Iran has the ability to close that strait using shore-to-ship artillery and missiles. Iran or its proxies could respond by targeting commercial vessels, including oil tankers or U.S. military vessels in the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb Strait or the Persian Gulf. Reporting indicates heightened Iranian readiness to conduct offensive operations against U.S. forces and interests. The millions of barrels of oil pass daily through the various bottlenecks from Middle East oil producers to global markets. So if that strait were to be closed by Iran, well, certainly oil prices would go through the roof, because that's 20%, a fifth of all oil globally consumed goes through that strait. So if it were closed, yes, you can imagine that, you know, when the demand remains the same but the supply goes down, then market forces say that the prices rise. So prices could become very, very high, or there may even be sort of the kind of thing that we saw in the 70s, where people are having to line up at gas stations because of and their gas stations run out of oil. Although now, of course, it's different from the 70s in that the United States is producing a lot more oil than it used to. In fact, the U.S. is now the world's largest producer of oil. U.S.-Iranian tensions have risen since Trump withdrew a year ago from a 2015 nuclear deal with Iran and major powers and began ratcheting up sanctions to throttle Tehran's economy. Vice Admiral Jim Malloy, commander of the U.S. Navy's Bahrain-based Fifth Fleet, told Reuters on Thursday his forces were on heightened state of readiness, although the U.S. military was not seeking or preparing for war with Iran. And this maritime agency said the U.S. flagships were encouraged to contact the Fifth Fleet at least 2 days before sailing through the Strait of Hormuz. The fleet's job is to protect commercial shipping in the area. Washington further tightened sanctions on Iran this month, eliminating waivers that had allowed some countries to buy its oil, with the goal of reducing Tehran's crude oil exports to zero. So, yes, Japan and South Korea and one other country were continuing to buy Iran's oil, and the United States has now eliminated those waivers that made that possible. Iran responded by relaxing some curbs on its nuclear program concerning material stockpiles, but continued to comply with commitments to restrict its uranium enrichment activity. Rhetoric has grown heated on both sides. The semi-official ISNA news agency quoted hardliner Ayatollah Tabatabai Nejad in the city of Isfahan as saying their billion-dollar fleet can be destroyed with one missile. If they attempt any move, they will face dozens of missiles, because at that time, government officials won't be in charge to act cautiously, but instead things will be in the hands of our beloved leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he said. Separately, Yadollah Javani, the elite Revolutionary Guard's deputy head for political affairs, said no talk will be held with the Americans, and the Americans will not dare take military action against us. Our nation sees America as unreliable, he said, according to the semi-official Tasnim news agency, echoing a stance Iran has taken since the U.S. withdrawal from the 2015 deal, under which Iran curbed its nuclear program in return for relief from economic sanctions. Thousands of Iranians took part in the state-sponsored marches on Friday to support the government's decision to reduce limits on its nuclear program. Iran has threatened to go further if other parties to the deal, Britain, China, France, Germany, and Russia, fail to shield it from U.S. sanctions. A state TV showed protesters marching after Friday prayers in Tehran and said similar marches had been held across Iran. America should know sanctions have no effect, chanted the protesters. So we are getting closer to war in the Persian Gulf. That seems to be pretty clear, even though the head of the commander of the Fifth Fleet is trying to deny that. Well, he's, of course, he says he's not preparing for war, but he is. He is. So things are getting pretty tense there. Let's see. And also, in addition to what Reuters reported, AFP is reporting that the U.S. sends assault ship and missiles to Mideast among the Iran threat. So this is in addition to that Reuters story, I believe. Pentagon announced Friday that it was deploying an amphibious assault ship and a Patriot missile battery to the Middle East. Yes, I think Reuters referred to it just briefly. Yes, and B-52 bombers are now stationed in Qatar. And here's a statement that says the United States does not seek conflict with Iran, but we are postured and ready to defend U.S. forces and interest in the region. Okay. All right, so and here was what President Trump said Thursday. What I would like to see with Iran, I would like to see them call me, Trump told reporters at the White House. We don't want them to have nuclear weapons. Not much to ask, he said. Well, yeah. You know, if you look at it from the position of the bad guys, you know, I mean, the leadership in Tehran, that's a bad bunch of people. And the leadership in North Korea, also a bad bunch of people. But if you look at it from their position, if you put yourself in their position, you know, and I'm not defending them at all. I mean, they're a bad bunch of people. The world would be better off without them and all that. But if you look at it from their position, you can see why they don't want to give up their nuclear weapons and why they're not going to give up their nuclear weapons. Because if they do, they're finished. You know, even North Korea, people talk about, oh, give North Korea security guarantees. Well, there's just exactly one security guarantee that will actually guarantee their security, and that is to let them have their nuclear weapons. That's the one thing that the United States will not let them have. And same with Tehran. Same with Tehran. Same with Iran. You know, the only way that they can continue is to have nuclear weapons. And they're not going to give them up. Regime change can happen in various ways, but I'm just afraid that it's going to happen in a way that is going to cause a great deal of pain and suffering to the world. Yes, well, you know, if there is war in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia will certainly be involved or should be involved. Maybe they won't be involved. They've not been involved in other situations that they should have been involved in. But anyway, Saudi Arabia should get involved. And we will. But once war starts, the thing about war is that once it starts, it becomes very fluid and no one can really predict the outcome. This is the sort of the risk of having a war, because once things start moving, then they take on a life of their own, and it becomes very, very difficult to control the direction of events. All right, let's take a very short break, and we'll come back in a minute or so, a couple of minutes, with more news from a Chinese perspective.
Folks, and look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casul with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Very good. Oh, boy. Massive repo.
And welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, May 11th. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Kyungjin Moon. I want to go to an interesting story on Breitbart now that deals with the question, what do you do, or what are the options for a country that has chosen socialism and discovered that it's not what it wants? How does it get back on track? How does it get back to a more rational, sustainable system? UN likes to use the word sustainable. Of course, socialism is not sustainable, as we've seen. So how do you get back to a system that is sustainable? And it turns out it's not easy to go from a socialist system to a free market system. And people may say, whoa, what about Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union? But we'll get to that. But that's a different situation, as we'll soon see. Because the people in Eastern Europe did not themselves choose to live under a socialist system. It was imposed upon them. And so when they had a chance to break out, then they were able to have the system that they wanted. But when a country such as Venezuela chooses to have, that they've chosen through election to have a socialist system, what do you do then? It's not easy, as we'll soon see. So this is a column by Joel B. Pollock on the Breitbart, and Blue State Blues is sort of the overall title that he gives his series of columns. And the title of this column is Venezuela, South Africa show that socialism is difficult to undo. Socialism has failed everywhere it has been tried. The same is true of most socialist policies, except where, as in Western Europe, the U.S. has paid for defense. And yet socialism continues to seduce the young and confound the old. This was the week in which Venezuelans were expected to throw off the yoke of Nicolas Maduro's ruinous socialist regime, and when South African voters had a chance to dislodge the corrupt, inept African National Congress after 25 years in power. Maduro may yet be ousted and the ANC saw its majority decline, but socialism and socialist ideas are proving incredibly difficult to undo, at least in circumstances where people have elected socialist regimes. Now, I've not been following the South African situation, so I don't know about that, but in Maduro's situation, Venezuela's situation, it's not just socialism, isn't it? It's the narcotics, the drug money, and the incredible flow of money that he's getting, frankly, from the United States in terms of the drugs that are coming in. And so he's getting money from that. Also, he's getting help from China and the Soviet Union to maintain power, and also from Hezbollah. He's getting support from Hezbollah. So it's not just about socialism in Venezuela. It's also about international politics. It's also about drug trafficking. But anyway, let's continue with this report. The nations of Eastern Europe were famously and fabulously rejected communism with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Since then, they have generally preferred right-of-center conservative governments and free market policies. But the difference in those countries is that socialism was usually imposed by force and deceit and reinforced by Soviet tanks. When people have freely chosen socialism, they almost never find a way to reverse it once things invariably go bad. And this is why the emphasis in the Cheonryuk Constitution, the Constitution of the United States of Cheonryuk, is to prevent socialism from happening in the first place, to make it illegal for the government to be involved in healthcare, education, and not to have a standing army, and to hold the total revenue of the federal government to within 10% of the gross domestic product, 10% of the economy, and not to have income tax, corporate income tax, individual income tax, these kinds of things. So there is a great deal of effort in that Constitution to prevent socialism from happening in the first place. And I think eventually the world will come around to that and realize that we need a Constitution that will not allow socialism, because socialism is a bad thing. I think we're going through a period when people are discovering the evils of socialism, and now, so I think in the future, I don't know when it will be, but there will be a time when the world is looking for a constitution that prevents socialism. The key to socialism's tenacity, even in the face of economic and social collapse, is that it changes the society around it in ways that are almost irreversible. For example, it creates groups of people entirely dependent on the state. Poor recipients of welfare, middle-class bureaucrats, and crony capitalists. Crony capitalists, yes, that's a big part of socialism. Remember, big government creates big corporations, and big corporations need big government, because they are able to then, if the government is big, then the corporations can write regulations and hand them to the government and say, okay, this is what we want enacted. And if you want our support, if you want our political contributions, we want this regulation, we want this law, which will help us by preventing any competitors from entering into our market. We want to close the market so that we have a monopoly. And this law will help us do that. So we want you to enact this law. And this kind of crony capitalism goes on all the time. This is going on today. The left says, oh, let's get rid of the big corporations. Let's tax the rich. Let's tax the rich. Well, the more taxes you collect, the bigger government gets. And the bigger government gets, the better it is for the rich. And eventually they will realize this. At least people will realize this. Yeah. Let's see. Crony capitalists who fear reasonably that freedom will damage their interests. Yes. They mobilize politically to protect their benefits long after the state can no longer pay them. That's happening with Social Security, frankly. The United States cannot maintain the current Social Security system. It is unsustainable. But it will continue because politically it is impossible to get rid of. Why? Because old people vote. Young people don't vote. Generally speaking, I mean, older people vote in much higher percentages than younger people, all right? So that is why the unsustainable Social Security and Medicare system in the United States will continue until it collapses, until someday when it collapses. Yeah, they mobilize politically to protect their benefits long after the state can no longer pay them. These were socialist systems that were introduced by the Democratic Party, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, during the 1930s. And now, less than 100 years later, we see that they are unsustainable. And we can't do anything about it. We can't do anything about it. It's politically impossible to touch those systems. Conversely, socialism also rids society of groups of people most likely to oppose it. The private sector and professional elite, whose assets are to be redistributed for the sake of the elusive goal of equality, learn very quickly that resistance has a massive cost. So they tend to leave, which suits the short-term interests of the regime, even if it guts society of the skills it needs to maintain economic growth and the leadership it would need to restore liberal self-government. Socialism also reshapes social mores, casting the alternative as immoral. Right? Right now, the Democratic Party says that anybody who opposes them is immoral. They're not just political opponents anymore. Republicans are not just political opponents. Republicans are immoral. There's this video of I think it was on the University of North Carolina campus where an anti-abortion person was pro-life person was demonstrating, and a pro-abortion person came up and started hitting her. Said, "No, what you're doing is wrong. You can't do this." You know, there's no possibility for opposing opinions, because opposing opinions are immoral. Opposing opinions are hate speech. You see, so this is what they're talking about here. Socialism also reshapes social mores, casting the alternative as immoral. Whereas the main capitalist argument against socialism is a pragmatic one, socialism's core argument against capitalism is that individual liberty is inherently selfish. It taps into human instincts of altruism, but also envy. Hence, President Barack Obama's refrains in the 2012 election, saying Republicans would tell voters, "You're on your own," and admonishing entrepreneurs, "You didn't build that." Under socialism, the only opposition people will allow themselves to imagine comes from the left. Though Maduro's radical defenders, such as Representative Ilhan Omar, deride interim President Juan Guaido as far right, in truth, he is also a socialist. Arguably, that has prevented him from presenting a real political alternative to Maduro, a framework of new ideas that could offer Venezuelans a way out of their economic malaise. That is true. Guaido is also a socialist, yes. He's not a real radical break from the current ruinous system. Instead, Guaido is reduced to political and diplomatic maneuverings, and in the end, he cannot succeed without relying on elements of Maduro's brutal regime. In South Africa, the official opposition to the Democratic Alliance, for which I used to work, offers a clear alternative set of principles rooted in individual liberty, but the ANC has convinced the public that such liberty only makes sense for those wealthy enough by virtue of their past racial privileges to take advantage of it. The debate that defines South African politics today is between two socialisms, between the elite central planning of the ANC on the one hand, and the populist, radical land grabs advocated by the new radical economic freedom fighters party on the other. One need not look abroad to find examples of socialism proving impossible to remove. Almost every major American city is governed by Democrats and has been for generations, despite the failures of Democratic Party rule. We've known that, yes. And look what's happening to them. San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. Last week, the city of Oakland decided to plunder gas tax revenues to keep the city's street lights on. In Flint, Michigan, state and local government contaminated the water supply, and now local authorities are also bungling the cleanup effort. It is alarming that only one of the more than 20 candidates for the Democratic Party's nomination for the presidency in 2020 has called out socialist policies as Medicare for all and the Green New Deal as bad and unrealistic. I think that may be Hughes. What was his name? Hughes, the former CEO of Starbucks. I think he is trying to position himself as a moderate Democrat, and so he is I think he has called out these as bad, and maybe that's what he doesn't really refer to that person, but I think that's what he's talking about. A few have gingerly brought up the uncomfortable reality of how much these policies will cost, but the majority of candidates are embracing these policies, as well as the racial demagoguery of Al Sharpton, now a party kingmaker. So, and what is it? Some of the candidates are saying, well, we don't have to worry about how much it's going to cost. They think that they can just print money. They can. I mean, China is proving that. You can, if you control the central bank, you can just print money. But there are consequences to that. the consequence eventually is hyperinflation, which is why socialism fails. As we see in Venezuela, 10 million%. The IMF was predicting inflation in Venezuela this year will be 10 million%. I mean, come on. There is every possibility that one of these candidates will win the 2020 election, propelled by the mainstream media and a concerted effort by the tech giants to censor and suppress Trump supporters. Even the least radical of these Democrats will have to consolidate support by bringing radicals into his or her administration, and they will govern with a Congress, or on the House side at least, whose agenda is being set by openly democratic socialist Jacobians. President Barack Obama, whose policies were the closest America has come to socialism, fully expected his legacy to continue, and parts of it remain. Obamacare remains the law of the land, for example, and the country now expects there to be some kind of federal health insurance program eventually. Voters who are tempted by any of the Democrats currently in the running for president should consider that the country's next turn to the left could well be permanent. All right. Joel B. Pollack is senior editor at large at Breitbart News. Yes, that is a very serious warning that the country's next turn to the left could well be permanent. And this is what many of us are concerned about. I mean, what happens after Trump? What happens after Trump? The Democrats are very determined to make sure that President Trump's tenure in office, whether it be 4 years or 8 years, is just a blip, just a blip in history. You know, and like Marxists, they believe that history is on their side, that they are riding the tide of history. This was the clarion call of the Marxists, that there's the tide of history, there's a wave of history that is moving inexorably towards communism. And we thought that we'd gotten rid of communism in the 80s and 90s, but no, it's alive and well, and it is alive and well in Washington, D.C. It is alive and well in Washington, D.C. Yeah. But, yeah, I agree with what he says, that it's going to be extremely difficult to get rid of socialism unless we adopt a new constitution that outlaws healthcare, government involvement in healthcare, that outlaws government involvement in education or in welfare in general. That's the way to get rid of socialism. But what will it take for that to happen? What will it take for people to realize that that is what is necessary? That's the painful part. And that's the judgment part. That's the part of judgment. So it will be, I think, that the U.S. will go through, and other countries as well, will have to go through some kind of a reset, some kind of collapse, perhaps before the Chinese Constitution can be adopted nationwide. A better way, I suppose, would be if we could have some kind of area of sovereignty, a small area. God always begins small. Okay, so we can have an area of sovereignty that is small, where we can adopt the Chinese Constitution on our own, the Constitution of the United States of China, and not be under any other sovereignty. In other words, right now we are under the sovereignty of the U.S. federal government. We are under the sovereignty of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We are under the sovereignty of the county of Pike and Wayne, and of the townships, various townships that we are. So, if we could have all that sovereignty removed and just have just the sovereignty of Chunuk, and then to say, okay, we're going to show a model for the world. We're going to show a model for the world where we are going to have a country, a sovereign area where we are going to encourage private ownership, private property, entrepreneurship, and the safety net will not be made by the government. Instead, it will be up to families and communities to create their own safety net for people who fail. We are going to show that this is the way that society can become prosperous and succeed. And I believe that it will succeed. if we have a chance to show it. I speculated, someplace that it may be that we would go to someplace that has really, really failed. Venezuela, yeah, but or Puerto Rico, I think, within the United States, Puerto Rico. If we could be allowed to, if the people of Puerto Rico would choose to adopt the Chattanooga Constitution, and Puerto Rico actually has the opportunity to become independent. They could vote that way. Every once in a while they have a referendum to become a U.S. state or to become independent or to maintain the status quo. And I think every time, or the last couple of times, becoming a state has won in the referendum, but they have not become a state because the U.S. Congress will not allow it. So if they could say, hey, you know what, let's become independent and let's have this thing called the Chattanooga Constitution and see how that works. Can't be any worse than what we already have. Maybe they will make that choice. Maybe they will make that choice. That would be an opportunity. Who knows? But yeah, the answer to Joe Pollack, the way to deal with countries that have chosen socialism, the way that Venezuela can get to get back to being a prosperous country, would be to adopt the Chattanooga Constitution. Yeah, I don't see any other way. And Pollack doesn't have any other answer, does he? He just says that, it's difficult. I don't see any other way. I don't see any way, he says. But we can offer this alternative. Yeah. Here, let's see some of the. Let's look at some of the comments to this article. Here we go. Here is socialism has failed everywhere it has tried. Indeed, why else do millions of people risk their lives to flee from socialist and communist countries to come to the United States? Okay, that's a good point. Let's see, what is here? Thank God for the Second Amendment, one person says. Well, the Second Amendment could become a means, yes, for changing or to defend ourselves against the excesses of socialism. And yes, the Second Amendment is an obstacle to the full implementation of socialism, isn't it? And as this next person says, exactly right. That is why the left is attacking this right from every direction. Lead-free capacity design, color release buttons, red flag laws, and the list goes on. And so forth in here. This person says, our system just does not work anymore. Probably Trump's two biggest mistakes were not firing or retiring all of Obama generals and getting his own people and stacking the Joint Chiefs, putting all your eggs in the we have to win back all three branches again. The country is sinking. The other huge mistake was allowing Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner anywhere near the White House. All right, let's take a longer break now, and we'll come back with more news after these messages.
Hi, I'm Joby Gorgas with Magnum Research, and I'm here to show you some of our new products for 2019. First up, we've got our white tiger stripe Desert Eagle. This is a new finish for 2019. It is our stainless steel gun with the tiger striping put into it. This is available in 50 AE, 44 Mag, and 357. Next up, we've got our 429 Desert Eagle. This is a new caliber developed specifically for the Desert Eagle by Magnum Research. What it is a 50 AE neck down to a 44 mag. Primarily, we're looking to get into the hunting market with this. Also have a line of ammunition that we launched with the gun as well. Here's the newest lineup to our BFR lineup. This is a 500 line bow. This is the largest production revolver cartridge on the market today. Also new for 2019 is our custom website. So if you have a Desert Eagle you would like, you can build it up and customize it on our site, www.customdeserteagle.com. And launching new for 2019, you can do the same thing with our BFR revolvers. That is www.custombfrrevolver.com.
Shooters. I've been shooting for about 6 years.
And I've been shooting for about 4 years.
It's exciting, fun, fast-paced. We shoot predominantly pistol and USPSA, and we also shoot quite a bit of 3-gun PCC matches. It's thrilling, really. It's a lot of work. And Car Firearms Group reached out, and Daniela gets a lot of attention. Where do you get your attention mostly?
From Instagram.
Right.
Because my dad makes me shoot crazy guns that people think I can't shoot, like the Deagle. People told me I was going to break my wrists and all this, and that I was too small and I couldn't shoot it, and I did, and it got a lot of attention.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's just amazing when you see how tiny she is, and in real life she's 90 pounds and 4 foot nothing, and she's not afraid of anything because she's been competing and shooting all these different firearms for so many years. And we're just really excited to be a part of the Car family of firearms, and everything they do is innovative and exciting. I carry a Car 9, and I think maybe someday she'll carry that when she's able.
Yeah.
Legally, what? Tell us about being 16 all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah, I just turned 16, and you have to be 16 to go to SHOT Show, so just in time, on the 16th. Yeah.
Barely squeezed in.
Perfect timing.
You gonna carry a pistol when you're old enough?
Yeah, probably.
It's our right? We gotta keep fighting for them or we'll lose them like everything else.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, May 11th of 2019, the 10th year of Chungi, 4th month, and 7th day by the heavenly calendar. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Chungi, Kyungjin Moon. Let's go to the stories on what's happening at the border. Dick Durbin says that he's a Democrat who does not want a border wall and wants more illegal immigration. And he says that the Pentagon, he's complaining that the Pentagon is transferring $1.5 billion to build a border wall. And he says that Pentagon has now reprogrammed 12 times more money to the wall than for repairs at Tyndall Air Force Base destroyed by Hurricane Michael. We should put troops first, he says. Well, I'm sure the repairs at Tyndall Air Force Base will be done, and it's not a matter of how much money you throw at it, it's what's effective. The funding transfers this is on a Breitbart, the funding transfers are being conducted under the national emergency declared by President Trump in February, when Congress refused to fund the border wall that was a central mandate of President Trump's 2016 election win. Durbin opposes the wall and opposes the pro-American border reforms proposed by Trump. For example, on May 8th, Durbin suggested to a panel of border officials that young migrants should be allowed to live in the United States if they claim they are being threatened by criminals. A new survey in Guatemala showed roughly 1 million adults, not counting their children, say they expect to migrate to the United States in the next 3 years. Since early 2018, Democrats have tacitly welcomed the migration of several 100,000 people from Central America. The migrants used catch and release rules to walk through border fences and into the U.S. job market and the U.S. neighborhoods, forcing down blue-collar wages and pumping up rental prices. And his Politico reported on May 8th, the expected $1.5 billion transfer comes on top of $1 billion shifted toward the border from unspent Army personnel accounts in March. Acting Defense Secretary Pat Shanahan unilaterally shifted the funds in the face of opposition from top Democrats on Capitol Hill. The Trump administration has already drawn the ire of congressional Democrats by deploying thousands of troops to help secure the southern border and moving to siphon off billions in military funding for the border, including a national emergency declaration to raid $3.6 billion in military construction funds. Shanahan told Durbin's panel on Wednesday that enough money has been placed on the contract to build 250 miles of border barriers. On May 8th, Shanahan predicted that 63 miles of wall will be built by October. Well, I sure hope so. And by the way, Shanahan has now been nominated by the president to become the not just acting defense secretary, but to become the full-time defense secretary. Of course, he will have to be approved by the Senate in order to take on that title. But he's doing a good job just as acting defense secretary of finding money for the wall and shifting it away from other purposes. We need to deal with this situation. The fact that legal immigration is about 1 million plus a year. Those are the people who receive green cards, and in many cases, those are people who are already in the United States. Perhaps about 400,000, I think, or something like that. Around half or so are people who are already in the United States. But the United States does welcome people from other countries. It is not a country that is closed off to other countries. But the problem with illegal immigration is that it is disorderly immigration. It is, there were all sorts of names given to Brexit depending on whether people wanted it or not. It was a disorderly Brexit, or it was a cliffhanger Brexit, something like that. So also in the case of the illegal immigration, we should make up all sorts of names for it. Disorderly immigration, pandemonium immigration, unhealthy immigration, because people are coming in who we don't know who they are. And cartels are, of course, making use of this mass immigration to transport their merchandise, whether that merchandise be women or children. That's what women and children are reduced to by the cartels, merchandise. And they transport their merchandise, women, children, and drugs through the border, across the border, making use of this illegal immigration situation. So, I'm sure Democrats are not in favor of child trafficking or of trafficking of women, but they allow a situation that is conducive to those things. They may not mind the drugs, probably, but illegal immigration is a disorderly immigration that needs to be brought under control. It needs to be brought under control. That is another way in which the U.S. society is going to be unsustainable, and eventually, socialism. Pollock was saying, "How do we do with socialism?" And eventually, socialism turns into dictatorship, and this may be what the Democrats are aiming for: to create a country. And this, I think, was exactly what Obama was aiming for: to create a country where opposition is not allowed, or opposition to democratic policies is not allowed, which is a dictatorship, right? That's a dictatorship. Dictatorship of the Democratic Party. And if the United States takes another turn to the left, that may be what we will have. So they are bringing in a new demographic of people that they hope will help them to establish that. And so that is why they want to keep the immigrants that are coming in and to undermine U.S. democracy, because they don't want democracy. It's the Democratic Party that calls itself democratic, but is going to actually undermine and destroy a democracy and turn it into a dictatorship. I'm looking at Guatemala here, wondering why it is that so many people in Guatemala want to come to the United States. And I was looking at here, I was trying to find a quick answer here in the CIA World Fact Book, but it doesn't seem to be really presenting itself. I'm looking at their constitution proposed by the president at the Republic by agreement of 10 or more deputies of Congress by the Constitutional Court. I see amendments to the Constitution, how that can be done, I see. You know, they don't really give, the CIA World Fact Book used to be fairly useful, but I'm not finding this to be very useful right now. People in society, ethnic groups, okay. Let's look at their economy. What's their economy doing? What's their economy like? All right, well, I can't find it so easily. I was hoping to find an easy answer there, but I can't. All right, let's see, we have a situation where, on the border, where the Border Patrol are actually having difficulty because they are catching all sorts of diseases, contracting diseases during their work on the border. And so they are having to be, in some cases, having to be vaccinated in order to prevent these diseases. This is a report on InfoWars. Border Patrol reports a record number of agents contracting illness from the illegal aliens that they deal with. More agents than ever before are calling in sick to work or showing up sick, says Border Patrol Union representative, who worries too many agents are succumbing to illnesses brought by illegal aliens. Carlos Favela, president of the National Border Patrol Council, Local 1929, says the number of agents affected by illnesses has reached alarming levels in recent years, with an estimated 20 to 25 agents from the El Paso sector calling in sick each day, while others come in to work sick because they've used up their sick days. I believe this is probably the record, Border Patrol wide since ever of agents calling in sick, Favela told ABC 7. According to Favela, numerous agents are filing union reports claiming they've contracted everything from the H1N1 virus to chickenpox to Legionnaire's disease after coming in contact with sick illegals encountered at the border. Favela, let's see here. Nope, I have a problem here. Suddenly my browser suddenly crashed. Okay, well, anyway, so Border Patrol agents are calling in sick because of their contact with the illegal aliens. And April was another record month in terms of the number of people coming across the border illegally, according to the government statistics. Okay. Right, let's see. While I'm waiting for that browser to come back up, let's see what we have elsewhere. Let's look at what InfoWars is reporting this morning. Parents sue the school for transgender brainwashing. Christians really need to stand up against this kind of thing. You saw how Muslims stood up against it in Birmingham, England. You know, a British school was teaching its students about homosexuality and about giving the sex education mandated by the British government, and parents were demonstrating outside, my child, my choice, my child, my choice. And they were Muslims, because Muslims don't like homosexuals, right? Christians need to stand up. I guess parents sue school for transgender brainwashing. CNN calls Trump the InfoWars president. Okay. Yes. CNN calls War the InfoWar president. And judge says you don't need to be a doctor to perform an abortion. This was an interesting situation that in Virginia, a federal judge struck down a law that was put in place in 1975, which said that abortions could only be performed by physicians. And the judge said, no, other people can also do abortions. So that's an interesting situation there. That's expanding abortion to that extent. And man of faith Cory Booker says thoughts and prayers are BS, okay, and so forth. Okay, all right, we're back here now. And let's see, what was that? We were talking about Border Patrol and the diseases that they're catching. Anyway, the union official says that favela says agents who are concerned they could infect their family members with infectious diseases such as tuberculosis. The nightmare for the agent out in the field, said favela, is that they contract tuberculosis or some kind of bacterial disease, and they unknowingly take that home to their families, and then their whole family is sick. To the Border Patrol Union president, the increase in sick agents coincides with the number of illegals arriving at the border. KVIA reports newly released figures from the Department of Homeland Security reveal Border Patrol agents encountered 109,144 migrants in April 2019, the highest since 2007. Favela argues it's hard to get the evidence needed to quantify the issue and prove a correlation, but he pushes back against Border Patrol officials who say they haven't noticed the trend. That's false, he said. Ever since the big surge of the immigrants started coming in, even as far back as September, we started seeing those numbers slightly increase of agents calling in sick. The border rep is urging the CDC to implement changes to better protect agents' health, including providing more screenings from doctors instead of nurses and new quarantine facilities for sick illegals. All right. So the people who are on the border really serving their country, we respect them, and we certainly wish them all the best and pray for them. Wish that they can be protected against the diseases that may be coming in. Not that all people coming in are diseased in that way, but there is a certain number, and this is why it's important to go through the orderly process. When my wife came to the United States, in order to get her immigrant visa, she had to get a health checkup. Yeah, she had to get a health checkup in order to get her immigrant visa. I don't know if they still do that for Koreans, but she had an X-ray, an X-ray picture that we carried on the airplane. I don't think they do that anymore. But there was if the immigration person at the airport wanted to examine her X-ray, then it was there. We had it with her, sealed, by the hospital in Korea. Anyway, that was how they did it back in the 80s. I don't think they require X-rays from Koreans anymore who are immigrating to the U.S. But I think certain countries, probably that's still being done. All right, let's do a couple more stories before we go to break. Michelle Malkin managed to get herself censored on Facebook. I've been trying to do this. I've been posting all sorts of stuff from InfoWars on purpose, trying to see what I need to do, just sort of see where the line is. But Michelle Malkin, she's not banned, all right? Don't get that idea. But Michelle Malkin is a conservative columnist, who writes very, very well. And one of her posts was taken down by Facebook. And it was a post where she was expressing support for people who have already been banned by Facebook. So let's see what that's about. Conservative author, media entrepreneur, and CPAC 2019 star Michelle Malkin has been censored by Facebook for posting supportive messages about recently banned conservative figures, Lorna Loomer and Gavin McInnes. As Breitbart News has reported, Facebook recently declared that posting support for certain banned individuals and organizations, including links to InfoWars, would result in post takedowns and bans. So I've posted maybe 8 to close to 10 links to InfoWars, but I guess I'm such small potatoes that they're not worried about me. They may get around to me eventually. But anyway, so far they have not taken anything off my page. But anyway, Michelle Malkin is a much bigger thing than I am. She has millions of followers. So this is a formula not just for banning the targeted individuals, but their friends and supporters as well. Used to its full extent, it could result in the purge of large swaths of anti-establishment grassroots from Facebook by the 2020 election. And as Pollack pointed out, this is an attempt to suppress the vote in favor of President Trump in the 2020 election. This is what the masters of the universe are doing. This is what they consider themselves to be, masters of the universe, the owners of the universe. But no, they are not the owners of the universe, and they need to be shown that. So let's all post links to InfoWars. All right, let's all do that. I've already shown that you can post 6, 8, 10 links to InfoWars and not get banned, not have them take down. So let's all do it. Let's all of us who are under the radar, all of us do it, and then collectively, I think we will have a pretty big influence. Malkin posted the following on Facebook. These are two of my friends, Laura Loomer and Gavin McInnes. They are banned from Facebook and Instagram for exercising their free speech, while violent jihad groups are allowed on these platforms to spread their murderous poison. That's exactly right. Not only that, but people who advocate assassinating the president are allowed to do this on Facebook and on Twitter, and there's no consequence. But then the person who posted posted content about those leftist people calling for Trump's assassination, that person was banned, or that post was taken down. But I posted it. It's on my Facebook. You can find it there. I spoke out passionately about deplatforming at CPAC and have done what I can to use my voice to speak for the voiceless. Laura and Gavin are suing the radical forces, SPLC and CARE, behind the insidious agenda to criminalize political dissent. I've donated to their causes, and I hope you will too. DefendGavin.com and LauraLoomer.us. I do not know how much longer it will be before I am next. Anyone and everyone who refuses to capitulate to the open borders, Sharia-enforcing social justice agenda is, quote, dangerous, unquote. Yeah, that was Michelle Malkin's post, which got her censored. That was the post that was taken down. Malkin reported on Twitter that her post had been taken down as a violation of Facebook's community standards. Yes, community standards. What an Orwellian term there. In a comment to Breitbart News, Malkin vowed to keep speaking out against big tech censorship. I will not stop protesting discriminatory deplatforming until I'm booted off the big three. Facebook, 2.1 million followers. Twitter, 2.1 million followers. Instagram, 60,000 followers, said Malkin. Since I created my first website in 1999, I have donated time, money, and energy to helping keep the internet free and supporting independent and grassroots voices fighting on the front lines. The witch hunts led by SPLC Soros and CARE Hamas are crippling the effective activism and investigative journalism that pro-liberty and pro-sovereignty Americans desperately need and want. Malkin also called for Republican attorneys general and the White House to take action to protect freedom of speech in America. We can help by funding McInnes and Loomer's lawsuits, but we can't do this alone. every Republican Attorney General should be investigating the nonprofit status of every speech-squelching hit group conspiring to silence anti-jihad, anti-open borders, pro-life social media users should be challenged, and we need more than tweets from the president. Malkin warned her supporters that she may be the next target of social media purge, urging followers to sign up to her newsletter as a backup option. I know my days here are numbered. You know, Twitter goons already put me on notice for my Mo cartoons post. Now Facebook, Instagram next, wrote Malkin. Stay in touch for my next big projects via my newsletter sign up. Always have a backup plan or 2 or 3. Yeah, well, that's a good idea to have a backup plan. Yeah. All right, so Michelle Malkin. But, you know, those of us who are under the radar can make use of our position by posting these things, because I think the Facebook algorithm takes time to get around to us. And maybe a few of us will be banned or at least censored. And that would be a good thing. The thing about tyrants, when you're going up against a tyrant, is that a tyrant always tries to act benevolent and magnanimous, all right? That's the image that they try to project. And so, for example, they will say, okay, yes, we banned InfoWars and we banned Paul Joseph Watson, we banned a few other people, but those are just special cases. That's not going to affect you. You don't have anything to worry about. It's just these special cases. They were really bad, but we're not going to do anything against you. This is the image that they try to project, all right? And when the initial sort of excitement dies down, then they'll take the next step. Then they'll go after Michelle Malkin, maybe, after everyone has sort of died down. Okay, well. And then they'll say, okay, well, you know, Michelle Malkin, she was bad, so we had to ban her. But you're okay. This is how Hitler did it. And this is how the communists do it. They sort of cut off as small slices at a time, all the while reassuring the rest of the population that they are okay, that they don't have any problem. So when we are going up against that kind of a tyrant, we need to make force tyrants into acting tyrannically. Now, this is necessary. We need to force tyrants to act tyrannically. In other words, we need to force them into a position where they feel they have to ban us in terms of Facebook. Then they are exposed. Then they cannot say, "Oh, we are not going after the free speech rights of average Americans." No, but when average Americans start getting banned, that's when this problem will really become obvious to everyone. Right? When people see InfoWars banned, they say, "Okay, well, you know, maybe he was a little bit too extreme." But no, but average Americans have to be banned. People like you and me have to be banned and censored for innocuous posts. And then that news has to get out. And it can get out by word of mouth, by other means. Yeah. So anyway, I'm seeing how many links to InfoWars I can put up on my Facebook before I get censored or banned or something. And so far I have not. Even yesterday I put up a post from Paul Joseph Watson, where in the thumbnail, Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, is depicted in a Mao suit. In other words, with the khaki sort of beret, or what do you call it, hat, and the Mao suit with the red star and stuff like that. And then behind him is a red flag, which is the flag of the old Soviet Union. And normally when I post a link, then that image would come up, right, on Facebook. You know how it works, right? You post a link, and then the image also comes up. The what do they call it? Anyway, the image comes up. But this time, the image did not come up. So that was a kind of a censorship on that image. But anyway, it's there. The link itself is there, and I plan to continue posting links from Paul Joseph Watson and from InfoWars as a kind of civil disobedience kind of thing. You know, it's kind of my way of my sort of nonviolent opposition to Facebook and their banning of these people. Not that I necessarily agree with everything that InfoWars does or that Paul Joseph Watson says. But, like the classical liberal person, I may not disagree with what a person says, but I will fight to the death to protect his right to say it. And that's what we need to do. That's what all of us need to do. Post stuff from Paul Joseph Watson, post stuff from InfoWars, and see what you need to do in order to finally get censored or banned. But we're under the radar, so I think we have, in that sense, that gives us a freedom. That gives us a lot of freedom, and we can do that. Right now they're showing the Paul Joseph Watson post that I put on my Facebook page. All right, let's take another break, a short break, and we'll go into our final half hour right after this.
I've been shooting for about 6 years.
And I've been shooting for about 4 years.
It's exciting, fun, fast-paced. We shoot predominantly pistol and USPSA, and we also shoot quite a bit of 3-gun PCC matches. It's thrilling, really. It's a lot of work. And Car Firearms Group reached out, and Daniela gets a lot of attention. Where do you get your attention mostly?
From Instagram.
Right.
Because my dad makes me shoot crazy guns that people think I can't shoot, like the Deagle. People told me I was gonna break my wrists and all this, and that I was too small and I couldn't shoot it, and I did, and it got a lot of attention.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's just amazing when you see how tiny she is, and in real life she's 90 pounds and 4 foot nothing, and she's not afraid of anything because she's been competing and shooting all these different firearms for so many years. And we're just really excited to be a part of the Car family of firearms, and everything they do is innovative and exciting. I carry a Car 9, and I think maybe someday she'll carry that when she's able.
Yeah.
Legally, what? Tell us about being 16 all of a sudden.
Oh yeah, I just turned 16, and you have to be 16 to go to SHOT Show, so just in time, on the 16th. Yeah.
Barely squeezed in.
Perfect timing.
You gonna carry a pistol when you're old enough?
Yeah, probably.
It's our right? We gotta keep fighting for them or we'll lose them like everything else.
Team guys.
You guys want to post your sign on Daniela?
Sure.
Come on, Ricardo. You want to post here?
Yeah.
welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, May 11th. I want to do a story in the Los Angeles Times this morning. There's a man out there who calls himself the tactical rabbi, and he is helping synagogues defend against anti-Semitic violence. And this is a feature story about this man. Let's see what it says. It was 45 minutes into his lecture when the rabbi pulled out an AR-15. Who thinks, by show of hands, that we should be carrying more guns in shul? Rabbi Raziel Cohen asked the crowd at the West Side Chabad Synagogue Wednesday night during an active shooter seminar organized in the wake of the deadly attack at Chabad of Poway. What is that? Poway? I guess Poway. Half the room raised their hands. In the days since the shooting, Chabad leaders in California have scrambled to secure public safety grants and to calm frightened congregants, mobilizing hundreds more through active shooter drills and community defense training. In Southern California, religious security experts such as Cohen, who calls himself the tactical rabbi, are quickly becoming their own cottage industry. Chabad is a movement of Hasidic Judaism. Unlike other Hasidic communities, which tend to be insular, Chabad views outreach to unaffiliated and less observant Jews as the heart of its theology, a position that sometimes puts it at odds with other Jewish groups. Los Angeles has more Chabad congregations than anywhere outside Brooklyn. A deadly attack on one of their own just 6 months after the massacre in Pittsburgh has raised painful questions of identity for a group long animated by outreach. The sect's embrace of Ahavat Yisrael, the commandment to love one's fellow as oneself, is these synagogues' reason for being. Our arms are open, but security always comes first. If some of the openness has to be sacrificed, so be it, said Rabbi Simcha Bachman, who heads Chabad of Glendale and is part of the sect's California leadership. And Jewish law, going back to the Torah, first and foremost is protecting lives. Everything else is secondary. And in the world we live in today, we need to focus on saving lives and keeping people safe. But safety comes at a price. One large Shabbat congregation meets in a building disguised as an empty storefront. Another now questions newcomers at the door. We don't, let's see here. We don't need to be victims, Cohen said. We need to protect ourselves now. Increasingly, many feel that means bearing arms. The benefit of having, this is in California now. This is in California. The benefit of having an individual in the synagogue with a gun is that they're fighting for something, Cohen said. They're much more willing to defend their kids than a person who's being paid $15 an hour. Indeed, men at Wednesday's event pushed back when the rabbi insisted that only those with advanced training could safely carry a gun in a synagogue. If a person in your synagogue is going to carry, I'm great with it, but he has to be trained, Cohen urged them. Excuse me. But others in the world of Jewish security were less sanguine about the prospect of so many armed men in a house of worship. Why only men? People are fixated with guns, said Jason Friedman, executive director of the Community Security Service, which has trained thousands of volunteers, including scores in Los Angeles. The debate about security has been framed around guns, and I always try to open up that frame. One rabbi outright opposed men coming to pray armed. The solution is never the gun, said Rabbi Avraham Zajak, who leads a Chabad congregation in Los Angeles. The solution is surveillance training. Surveillance training. Until now, training was one of few options available. At an organizational event, Chabad has been keenly attuned to security since its emissaries were killed in the 2008 terror attacks in Mumbai. But individually, many congregations still operate on a shoestring. There are some buildings out here with an annual $250,000 security budget, said Rabbi UC Elfert of Megan M., a San Diego-based religious security firm. I grew up with Chabad, and our buildings are mostly not playing in that ballpark, so we need to find other security solutions. Grants from the Department of Homeland Security's Urban Areas Security Initiative have helped bridge the gap, funding target hardening infrastructure such as fencing, alarms, and surveillance cameras. But until last month, the grants could not be used to pay for armed guards. It's very important and welcome, Backman, the Glendale rabbi, said of the change. But even if those grants don't come through, and they don't always come through, we all know that we need to find the money for those security upgrades. After the shooting in Poway, Governor Gavin Newsom announced a huge injection of cash for the state's nonprofit security grant program, increasing the fund by about $500,000 to $15 million. But many of the more inventive defenses don't cost a thing. One Los Angeles synagogue sits behind a bare storefront with papered windows on a blighted stretch of a bustling boulevard. Nothing about the facade suggests it is a house of worship, much less a Jewish one, except for the fact that this has been now publicized in the Los Angeles Times. Although its insides are often crammed or bursting from the outside, the building looks abandoned. There's no signage on purpose for security reasons, the rabbi said. I don't want attention. I would rather be invisible now. The synagogue recently hired an armed guard, but the rabbi sees this mainly as a deterrent. His faith lies with fellow members of the community, dozens of whom have trained with community security service. We have 36 volunteers, both men and women, who come every week, the rabbi said. They're very vigilant, they're very aware, they have a very sophisticated communication with each other and the LAPD. A typical Shabbat at this synagogue will see a mother in a skirt suit and bobbed wig standing guard with an earpiece and a walkie-talkie at her hip. Such electronics are forbidden to touch, much less use on the Sabbath. But the commandment to protect lives in danger supersedes virtually every other rule of the Jewish law. A community security service declined to provide specifics, citing safety concerns, but Friedman, the firm's executive director, said that in neighborhoods like Pico Robertson, where there are scores of synagogues, its teams communicate not only among themselves but with one another. Being of the community, we have to be cognizant and sensitive of the restrictions, he said. There's no point of being a Jewish organization if we're not. Yeah, okay, so these people are doing this. And, we know that after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, a security commission was set up to study how this kind of thing could be avoided in the future. And the answer was, the recommendation was that schools allow their teachers and staff to be armed and trained, of course, anyone who is armed has a responsibility to receive training. I mean, that's just common sense. You don't buy a car and then not learn how to drive, right? So you also don't buy a gun. It's just common sense that you receive training, but it's the person's own responsibility to do that. Yeah. More and more people are becoming aware that we need to take care of our own self-defense. We cannot rely on the police. They're becoming more and more aware that the police often and usually arrive after the killing is done. This is what happened in Pittsburgh. 11 people were killed, and the shooter was on his way out of the building, according to a CNN article that I read. The shooter was on his way out of the building. He was finished. He was done. He was going home, or wherever he was going, I don't know. But he was going out of the building when the police arrived. All right? And so he went, the shooter then retreated back into the building, and they spent about 20 minutes trying to find where he was hiding within the building. But he had done all of his killing before the police arrived. And the tragedy of that situation, the tragedy of every mass shooter incident is that there aren't people there who can deal with that situation in seconds instead of letting it go on for minutes. When seconds count, the police are only minutes away. That's the truth. That's the truth. As I consider it my Christian duty to be armed wherever it is legal for me to be armed. Because if I'm present at such a situation, then I will work within the limits of my training to deal with that situation. Yeah, if all adults were like that, then this would be a much, much safer society. armed and then trained, good people who are good, you know. And I'm not going to whip out my weapon and start shooting people, am I? No, because I've been raised with a certain morals and ethics. So I'm only going to use my weapon, my firearm, to protect life and to stop a situation where life is being endangered. And so I received a training. I've also studied the laws of Pennsylvania, which defined when and where I'm allowed to use my firearm, and I will act accordingly. And there are many others who are doing the same, and that's why we are safer here than they are in Los Angeles. Yes. All right, let's go to this story about President Trump's tariffs. On Friday morning, 12:01 a.m. on Friday, so yesterday morning, President Trump raised the tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese imports from 10% to 25%. And he's also instructed the USTR, that's the United States Trade Representative's Office, to prepare a situation where they're able to apply tariffs to all Chinese goods. So President Trump intends to keep ratcheting up the situation. This article, this is the Washington Post article reprinted in the Greenwich Times. This article is trying to sort of undermine that effort, as you would expect the Washington Post to do, by saying that, you know, President Trump may be creating something that is going to be permanent. That he says that he's, you know, raising tariffs to try and force the Chinese government into compromising or into agreeing to terms, coming to terms with the United States on things like intellectual property theft. But the Washington Post is trying to say that, well, you know, these tariffs are going to be permanent, and they're going to raise consumer prices in the United States, and that's going to hurt President Trump's re-election chances in 2020. Well, you wish. You wish. Well, let's see what the Washington Post is trying to tell us here. The failure of the United States and China to reach agreement Friday on a comprehensive trade deal raises the possibility that President Donald Trump's favorite negotiating tool, high tariffs on imported goods, may be hardening into a permanent feature of the U.S. economy. 2 days of talks ended Friday with no sign of the agreement that both governments once had predicted would be achieved by this point. After parting company with Chinese Vice President Liu He, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin pronounced the latest discussions constructive but declined to elaborate. So, yeah, the Chinese, I guess, have gone back, the Chinese delegation has gone back to China, and we'll have to see when and where negotiations will continue. So in the meantime, U.S. is collecting these tariffs on Chinese goods. That makes it more difficult for China to sell its merchandise in the United States, and the merchandise is more expensive now, because there's this 25% tariff tacked on, most of which will probably get passed on to the consumer. Distributors will try to cut down that amount because it becomes more difficult for them then to compete against domestic products and also products imported from other countries. So the Post is going to say that this means that there's going to be an increase in consumer prices for the United States, that there's going to be inflation is going to be resulting. Well, we'll see. So far, there hasn't been. And so far, President Trump's tariffs have not caused inflation to rise. So I don't know why the Washington Post thinks that something's going to change. Less than 12 hours earlier, U.S. tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods had increased to 25% from 10%, in a sign of the president's waning patience with the negotiations. Trump, who has started the process of imposing tariffs on all the remaining U.S. imports of Chinese goods, also issued a flurry of tweets embracing tariffs as his preferred economic policy and hinting that China levies might linger. The relationship between President Xi and myself remains a very strong one, and conversations into the future will continue. In the meantime, the United States has imposed tariffs on China, which may or may not be removed depending on what happens with respect to future negotiations, the president tweeted. Trump's enthusiasm for tariffs has been no secret since his call during his presidential campaign for a 45% tariff on everything Americans buy from China. But his focus on tariffs is a striking departure from the policies pursued by his Democratic and Republican predecessors, especially if he proceeds with his threats to apply tariffs to all $540 billion of annual U.S. purchases from China. Tariffs will bring in far more wealth to our country than even a phenomenal deal of the traditional kind, he said in an earlier tweet, adding that raising taxes on imports was much easier and quicker to do. Well, so who's paying these tariffs, though? All right? Who's paying these tariffs? Eventually, it's the U.S. consumer. So I'm not sure what he means by bring in far more wealth to our country. Because eventually it's the U.S. consumer that's paying. Since launching his tariff wars in January 2018 with a levy on washing machines, Trump has wielded his tariff club ever over solar panels and industrial metals and in a bid for new trading arrangements with China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. None of the tariffs that the president has imposed have been removed. Trump's refusal to lift tariffs on steel and aluminum imported from Mexico and Canada has sparked a revolt among Senate Republicans who are refusing to approve his new North American trade deal until he lifts those tariffs. Opposition has been especially pronounced among senators representing farm states that have been hurt by Mexico's retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural products. Along with more tariffs on Chinese goods, Trump also is considering raising import taxes on automobiles and a variety of products from the EU. Completing the administrative process involved in levying tariffs on the remaining Chinese goods could take months. Well, of course, raising tariffs, one thing it does do is that it helps domestic American industries in many cases, not in all cases, because in some cases it'll simply make it easier for other countries to import into the other countries' goods to be sold in the United States. So, if you put tariffs on Chinese goods, then other countries can sell the same merchandise in the United States at a lower price. Or U.S. industries could start producing those products, and that would create more jobs in the United States. So it has all sorts of, these things always have unintended consequences. And we'll have to see what the consequences are here. But the president is drawing closer to a choice between a major escalation of his tariff campaign, one that risks enormous economic and political fallout, and a disappointing outcome at the bargaining table. We're in a very different spot than we were just a week ago, said Carla Hills, who was a U.S. Trade Representative under President George H.W. Bush. Tariffs are not a good negotiating tool. The president's claim that the tariff bill is paid by countries on whose products levies are imposed has been criticized by economists associated with both parties. Several studies have shown that the financial impact of the U.S. tariffs imposed over the past year has fallen entirely on American consumers and businesses. Well, it depends on how you look at it. Of course, as I said, the actual tariffs are paid by U.S. consumers, all right? I mean, eventually it gets past, when the price goes up 25% at the border, then the American consumer who wants to buy that product will pay that 25%. But of course, the larger impact is on the producing country, on China, because it now is selling less to the United States. Not other people will buy other stuff, either American products or products from other countries. So China now is not able to sell as much in the United States, and so its economy, it is losing jobs. Jobs there are lost. Its businesses are hurting. So there are consequences all over. And this here's Gary Shapiro. Raising tariffs will be disastrous. The tariffs already in place have cost the American technology sector about $1 billion more a month since October, said Gary Shapiro, president of the Consumer Technology Association. That can be life or death for small businesses and startups that can't absorb the added costs. Okay. Trump's promise to overhaul U.S. trade agreements was a major element of his appeal to voters in industrial states in the Midwest, which suffered major job losses that many voters blamed on unfair foreign competition. The president's most recent tariff moves against China have pushed what is known as the weighted average applied U.S. tariff rate, once among the lowest in the world, to just over 4%, higher than the Chinese, Russian, and Turkish figures, according to Deutsche Bank. Trump's muscular approach cheered his protectionist supporters, while President Trump placed tariffs on China. Our economy has boomed 3.6%, unemployment 3.2%, income average hourly earnings and GDP at 3.2%, tweeted Dan D'Amico, former chief executive of the steel company Nucor. That is true. Despite the tariffs, or perhaps because of the tariffs, the U.S. economy is doing very well. Yeah. So you can't argue that either. But the long-term effects are what worry the economists, and we will see what the long-term effects are, and how the GDP continues to do during the remainder of the year. Let's see, we just have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to see, there was an article about gene-edited babies in the Wall Street Journal, but you can't get to it because they want us to subscribe. All right, so we will not go to that. Let's see, what else is on Drudge? Has anything new come up on Drudge while we were talking? Okay, doesn't look like it. Lord of Amazon, that's Jeff Bezos, wants Moon's water. Okay, I guess he can have that. Let's see, paper says Trump takes over a 4th of July celebration, changing location, inserting self into program. Yeah. In America, the wettest year in USA history. There has been a lot of rain this year, hasn't there? Yeah, well, I'm sure that goes up and down. Let's see here. The cops suspect had 7 syringes hidden in body cavity. Ouch. How does that work? I don't want to know. No, thank you. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Cuba launches widespread rationing in face of crisis. Okay. Cuba, are they finally coming down? No. I think Cuba really is an example of the failure of economic sanctions. United States started sanctioning Cuba back in, late 50s or early 60s. And the Communist Party there has been chugging along despite all that. The Cuban government announced Friday that it is launching widespread rationing of chicken, eggs, rice, beans, soap, and other basic products in the face of a grave economic crisis. Commerce Minister Betsy Diaz Velasquez told the state-run Cuban news agency that various forms of rationing would be employed in order to deal with shortages of staple foods. She blamed the hardening of the U.S. trade embargo by the Trump administration. Economists give equal or greater blame to a plunge in aid from Venezuela, where the collapse of the state-run oil company has led to a nearly 2/3 cut in shipments of subsidized fuel that Cuba used for power and to earn hard currency on the open market. Oh, that might have something to do with it, yeah. We're calling for calm, Diaz said, adding that Cubans should feel reassured that at least cooking oil would be in ample supply. It's not a product that will be absent from the market in any way. Now, Cuba imports roughly 2/3 of its food at an annual cost of more than $3 billion, it says, I think here, 3. And brief shortages of individual products have been common for years. In recent months, a growing number of products have started to go missing for days or weeks at a time, and long lines have sprung up within minutes of the appearance of scarce products like chicken or flour. All right, so another socialist country going down the drain. And we know what the future of that is. But let's prevent socialism from coming to our country, can we? Can we do that? Can we do that? Can we support President Trump and just keep the democratic socialism lovers at bay? Can we do that? Can we promise to do that? And in order to do that, let's fight against the censorship by the big tech companies. Okay, they're trying to suppress Trump support, suppress Trump voters. So let's fight against that. All right, we're out of time. That's all the time we have this morning. And thank you for joining us this morning or through video later on. And God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.
$3,811. Well, I hope you'll stick with us today. We're going to unravel a lot of what's taking place. We're going to unravel a lot of what's taking place. I start with this proposition. You have a man who decided to run for president of the United States.